The crunch of tire treads crushing my perfect grass is a sound I will never forget, especially the 47th time it happened on my own front lawn. Marlene Kensington's spotless white BMW rolled across my Kentucky bluegrass again, leaving deep ruts like a signature carved into my pride. Her sharp heels clicked across the damaged turf, clipboard in hand, as if she were inspecting a kingdom she owned. I watched from my kitchen window, heart pounding, as she parked 15 feet from the community center's side door, smiling as if she'd just completed a royal decree. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the 10th. It was the 47th. Each time she treated my property like a convenience, like an obstacle she could bulldoze through without consequence. The more she did it, the more her confidence grew until it became arrogance. And arrogance, I'd learned in 40 years of engineering, always has a weakness. That day, as she stepped out of her BMW and strutted toward the building, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not revenge, something colder and more precise. A plan, a trap, because I had spent my life solving problems with patience, measurement, and quiet persistence. And now I was done being her victim. I was about to show her what happens when a dictator in a suburban suit meets a man who understands systems and refuses to be ignored any longer. I wasn't a man who looked for trouble. At 63, I had spent the better part of 4 decades designing manufacturing systems, solving problems that required patience, precision, and calm. Retirement had not been kind to our savings. After my company downsized when I was 61, I was forced to live on a reduced pension and odd handyman jobs. Diabetes had arrived last year, turning my body into a machine that required constant monitoring, constant adjustment, constant calculation. My hands shook sometimes, just enough to make precision work difficult. But the lawn was different. The lawn was my sanctuary. It was the one thing I could still keep perfect in a world that kept slipping into chaos. Every Saturday, I would mow in perfect diagonal lines, edging so sharp you could slice paper on them. I named my tools Reliable Rita, Steady Eddie, Precise Pete, and I knew every one of them by feel. My wife Sandra used to joke that I could fix anything except her tendency to overwater the houseplants. Now, as her early-stage dementia began to show, that lawn became more than pride. It became a symbol of control in a life that felt like it was unraveling. When Marlene Kensington first rolled across it, I tried to handle it the way I handled any engineering problem, politely, calmly, with reason. I stepped outside and asked her not to park there. She looked up from her clipboard, eyes glazed with entitlement, and told me it was HOA business, my grass would grow back, and I was being dramatic. Her dismissal hit me harder than the tire tracks. The second time she drove across my lawn, I tried a reasonable solution. I spent an afternoon buying decorative rope and posts, installing a tasteful barrier to mark my property. It looked like something you'd see at a country club, white rope between green posts, carefully aligned, measured twice, cut once. I stood back and felt a rare optimism. Maybe this would finally make her stop. Then Thursday arrived. The sound of rope snapping under tire pressure was like a physical insult. Through my window, I watched her BMW push through the barrier as if it were nothing. The posts toppled, rope dragged through the mud, and she didn't even slow down. That's when I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. People are not machines. A machine fails at a point you can identify. A person breaks in a way you cannot predict. Marlene wasn't a malfunctioning system. She was a force, and she was testing my limits. The next day, an official-looking letter arrived, Meadowview Estates letterhead. A warning about unsightly barriers creating safety hazards, citing an HOA covenant, demanding removal within 72 hours, threatening a fine. I read it 3 times, my engineering mind analyzing the logic. Emergency access, my rope barrier was set back 20 feet from the street. Decorative fencing under 3 feet didn't require approval. The real message was clear. Power. Marlene was using her position to bully me, and she expected me to accept it. I started documenting everything. Timestamps, photos, weather conditions, depth of tire ruts. I created a spreadsheet on Sandra's old laptop and began treating this like a system problem. If she wanted documentation, I could out-document her. When Sandra brought me coffee and said, "Your father always said the best way to deal with a bully is to become something they can't control," I realized she was right. This wasn't about grass anymore. It was about control. And I was done letting her control my life. I began to observe Marlene's pattern with the focus of a man who had spent his life measuring things. The The tire tracks showed consistency, the same entry angle, the same path, the same stopping point where she checked her makeup in the rearview mirror. It wasn't random. It was predictable. Engineers love predictability. It makes calculations possible. I walked her path with a measuring tape and counted 43 steps from the street to her preferred parking spot. The ground was softer at a specific point, where her tire always paused. That night in my workshop, I sketched a new plan, not a barrier, not a sign, something that worked with her predictable behavior instead of against it. I installed official-looking private property signs, researched legal wording, and even called the non-emergency police line to verify my rights. The signs were bold, clear, impossible to miss. I watched the next day, genuinely hopeful. She would stop now, I thought. But Marlene didn't stop. She drove straight through the signs like a tank. This time she brought friends. 3 catering trucks followed her BMW across my lawn, turning my carefully maintained yard into a construction zone. Deep ruts tore through 2 years of growth. My underground sprinkler system, 20 years of careful work, snapped under their weight. Diesel exhaust mixed with the smell of torn roots. I stood at my window, feeling something shift inside me, not anger, calculation. I had been dealing with a bully. Now I was dealing with a criminal. Friday brought a new letter, another violation notice, plus an invoice for irrigation damage to community center landscaping. The audacity of it made my stomach turn. She was billing me for damage caused by her own trucks. The paperwork listed repairs to sprinkler lines that had been broken for months. When I spoke with my neighbor Tom, a retired insurance adjuster, he confirmed what I already suspected. Marlene's trucks had driven through a flower bed with broken sprinkler heads. And she was using the community's own broken system as a justification for charging me. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was fraud. I began to dig deeper. I contacted my insurance company, the county clerk's office, and a journalism student neighbor named Danny. He was hungry for a story. I didn't know it then, but his curiosity would become a key piece of my plan. Marlene responded to my insurance claim with a counterclaim describing an imaginary pedestrian incident supported by photos she had staged. But her timestamps didn't match the facts. Her story fell apart under simple comparison with my own photos. She was making mistakes, and mistakes are evidence. Then came the formal notification that shattered any illusion of neighborly cooperation. A letter on my door declared my entire front lawn designated as auxiliary parking for Marlene's charity gala. She invoked an emergency clause that only applied to snow removal. She had invented a crisis to justify using my property. The event arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon. 70-odd luxury cars rolled across my lawn, guided by valet attendants. Camera flashes popped, as if my property had become a stage for humiliation. A local newspaper photographer captured the scene with a headline that framed my suffering as community sacrifice. I watched from my workshop, Sandra beside me, and realized the true scale of her power. She wasn't just destroying my lawn. She was rewriting the narrative. She was turning me into the villain. Sunday's cleanup revealed the full cost: $8,200 in damage, sprinkler replacement, soil remediation. My insurance covered part of it, but I was still responsible for over $2,000 I didn't have. Then Danny brought me the evidence that changed everything. 3 years of tax filings, insurance claims, HOA records. Marlene had been filing fraudulent deductions, claiming property damage as community beautification expenses. She had created an LLC that funneled money to her cousin's landscaping company in another state, work that never happened. The numbers were staggering: tens of thousands in fraudulent claims, tax deductions, and insurance payouts. This was not a bully, it was a criminal enterprise. I felt a familiar sensation, pieces clicking into place like a complex system finally revealing its solution. Fraud leaves a paper trail, and paper trails can be followed. The next step was not revenge, it was justice. I began building a case, a timeline, a map of every property she had damaged. I enlisted neighbors who had been hurt by her schemes. I contacted a federal prosecutor. I positioned security cameras to capture her next move, and I waited for her to make the one mistake she could not undo. The plan came down to one simple truth: Marlene was predictable. Her arrogance made her predictable. Her sense of entitlement made her predictable. She always parked in the same spot, followed the same path, and believed she could do anything without consequence. So I prepared a trap that would not harm her but would expose her. I chose expanding foam, cheap, available, and ruthless in its expansion. It would bond to rubber, harden quickly, and immobilize a tire without damaging the vehicle. I drilled a small hole in the ground at the exact coordinates where her front tire always stopped. I placed the canister, covered it with sod, and watered it lightly so it looked natural. The spot was invisible to anyone who wasn't watching closely. The next step was ensuring witnesses. I gathered 7 families who had suffered under Marlene's rule. We pooled our evidence. We coordinated security camera coverage. Danny arranged for a federal prosecutor and an FBI investigator to attend the next charity event as concerned community members. Marlene sent a cease and desist letter through an expensive law firm, accusing me of stalking and harassment. She called a board meeting to try to expel me from the community. Her threats were a confession. She was afraid. Fear means you are close to the truth. When the board meeting arrived, she expected support. Instead, neighbors stood up one by one and told their stories. Property damage, intimidation, fraudulent claims, ruined lives. The room shifted. The narrative collapsed. Marlene's authority began to crack. And then the day arrived, the Holiday Hope Gala, the biggest event of the year. Channel 7 News was there, cameras poised to capture every moment. The valet began directing cars onto my lawn. The crowd watched as luxury vehicles rolled across the grass, turning my yard into a muddy lot. At 5:45 p.m., Marlene arrived. She drove the same route she always did, confident, smug, convinced that no one could stop her. The cameras followed her approach. The reporters spoke about community leadership. The crowd waited for her grand entrance. And then the foam activated. The front tire crushed the hidden canister. Yellow foam erupted like a chemical geyser, expanding rapidly around the wheel. In seconds, her pristine BMW was immobilized, anchored to my lawn by a hardened mass. The crowd gasped. Phones rose. Camera flashes exploded. Marlene stepped out, heels sinking into the soft ground, staring at the foam as if it were a curse. Her face turned from confusion to rage. She screamed, demanding to know what I had done. I walked calmly toward her, aware that dozens of cameras were recording every step. I spoke clearly, so the microphones would catch every word. I told the crowd she had driven across my lawn 47 times, caused thousands of dollars in damage, and filed fraudulent insurance claims for repairs she never intended to make. I told them she had used our properties like her own private parking lot for years. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the sound of a tow truck arriving 2 hours later, using industrial solvents and hydraulic cutters to free her car. Channel 7's live broadcast captured every moment. The footage went viral within hours, but the foam was only the beginning. A federal prosecutor revealed herself shortly after, presenting a warrant to seize Marlene's documents. The IRS announced a comprehensive audit. Federal investigators uncovered a multi-state fraud network that had generated over $100,000 in illegal profits. Marlene's assets were seized. Her HOA presidency was suspended. Restitution was ordered, covering not only my lawn restoration, but improvements beyond what I had lost. By December, my yard looked better than it had in 20 years. Sandra's health stabilized with the help of the settlement. The HOA elected a new board, with me as treasurer, and implemented transparency measures that became a model for other communities. A tool library opened, bringing neighbors together in a way Marlene never could. Danny's investigative series won awards and led to new legislation for HOA oversight. Marlene pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges and received a sentence that included property restoration work for low-income homeowners, a poetic justice that fit the kind of system I understood best. I kept the empty foam canister in my workshop beside reliable Rita and precise Pete as a reminder. Patience, precision, and documentation can turn the smallest action into the downfall of a tyrant. In the end, the lawn wasn't just restored. The community was healed. And the man who had once been bullied into silence became the one who taught an entire neighborhood that power can be challenged when good people refuse to stay quiet.